Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Politico Playbook co-authors Anna Palmer and Jake Sherman.
All right, good morning. Happy Friday. I am Anna Palmer, and this is my co-author, Jake Sherman. Thank you guys so much for coming out this morning, and thank you for all of you who are tuning in on live stream. We are very excited that House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi is joining us this morning. I don't think
shortage of news for Nancy Pelosi.
A better time to sit down with the California Democrat a couple days after Trump's joint session, and also after Attorney General Jeff Sessions just recused himself from investigating on the Russian interference on elections.
We're going to talk about a whole host of issues leading in these first 100 days of the Trump administration and the new Congress. Before we get started with the program, though, I'd like to extend a special thank you to our partners at the Peter G. Peterson Foundation for their support in making this event possible. Also, next week, a sneak preview that we're just announcing for the first time here, we'll have Mitch McConnell in an event next week. And the Peter G. Peterson Foundation is also making that conversation possible. Now here to say a few words, the president and CEO of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, Michael Peterson. Mr. Peterson, thank you so much for joining us.
The debt is a critical issue for our economy. So as we head into the 2017 policy debates, all of the major issues, healthcare reform, tax reform, defense spending, have the potential to significantly improve or significantly worsen our fiscal outlook. So it's important for the new administration and Congress to take into account where we're starting from and where we're headed. So let me start with a brief context of our fiscal situation. So in 2007, we had a deficit of $161 billion. And then we had this horrible financial crisis, which actually affects the budget in two ways. We have a significant revenue shortfall due to unemployment, reduced incomes, et cetera. So revenue fell considerably. And you actually also have a spending increase due to unemployment insurance, the stimulus, and other public assistance. And the deficit exploded to a high of $1.4 trillion in 2009. In 2016, last year, we had a return to a more normal economy. Revenues rebounded significantly, as you can see. Spending was relatively flat. Some decreases in discretionary spending was offset by increases in entitlements and interest, and we ended up with a deficit of $587 billion. So we had a great reduction, but still a pretty significant level of deficits. Unfortunately, the future is not nearly as bright. So over the next 10 years, this is our deficit path. So in 2023, just 6 years from now, we'll be back once again to deficits that exceed $1 trillion. And this is certainly an unwelcome trend, but frankly, what our foundation is more focused on is the long term, which is even more bleak. So if you're looking over the long term, the best way to look at debt is as a share of the economy. And 60% is considered a reasonable maximum by many economists. In fact, the original European Union required that all members be below that level to be able to join. So here's where we are today at 77%. This is the highest level since World War II. But this is the long-term path that we're on. We're on path to reach 141% by 2046. That would be the highest in history by far, and is certainly an unsustainable and dangerous path for us to be on. So what's causing this? Three basic drivers. One is demographics. We have about 76 million baby boomers beginning to retire in significant numbers, so a big population coming through the retirement system. Two, increasing longevity. So that big group is living longer, which is great, but it does mean more years in retirement. And lastly, and very importantly, our inefficient healthcare system. These seniors consume a great deal of healthcare, and the system we operate in this country is highly inefficient. So how does the debt affect the economy? Well, it starts by affecting the budget. So these are the top 7 budget categories in 2016. I'm going to leave the labels off for a minute, but one of them is the 7th. By 2028, that budget item becomes the 3rd largest. By 2046, it becomes the 2nd largest. And by 2050, it becomes the single largest item in the budget. Does anyone want to guess what that is? Interest. So interest on the debt is on pace to become our single greatest priority in the budget, ahead of all these very important programs. Another thing that debt does is something called crowding out. So discretionary spending is where a lot of the investments are into the economy: education, infrastructure, research, and development. In 1970, most of the budget was discretionary, 61%. But this year, it'll be down to 30%. and by 10 years from now, it's down to 20%. So the growth of these mandatory spending programs and interest on the debt compounding is squeezing this discretionary spending. The other effects the debt have on the economy, it takes away capital from private investment. It reduces our fiscal flexibility, so if we have another crisis, we have less ability to handle it. It hurts confidence, it lowers certainty, and importantly, it risks the safety net. So without a sustainable budget, the safety net and those who depend on it are put in jeopardy. So some good news before I depart, there's a lot of solutions. There's many ways to solve this problem. So as I mentioned, our foundation is nonpartisan. We did something a couple of years ago called the Solutions Initiative, where we gathered 5 different think tanks from across the political spectrum to solve the budget. Do whatever you want. Tell us what you'd like to do to the budget if you could, and we'll score it. And so here's what they did. Here's the path we're on. This is what the American Action Forum did, the American Enterprise Institute, the Bipartisan Policy Center, the Center for American Progress, and the Economic Policy Institute. And so they all successfully stabilized the debt. Clearly, they did a lot of different things. They all had different opinions on how to get there, but this proves that there's many ways to solve this problem. So before handing this off, I just wanted to touch base on the current reforms under consideration and put them in some fiscal context for you. Healthcare and the ACA are clearly front and center. Healthcare, as you know, is a key fiscal issue. 70% of our future spending growth in the budget is in healthcare, so it's very important fiscally. It's also a huge economic issue. 18% of our GDP is spent on healthcare. Spending has tripled over the last 20 years, so it's on a significant growth path, which has effects on our competitiveness, on wages, et cetera. And in terms of the ACA, it generated considerable revenues. It does generate considerable revenues. Over the next 10 years, the projection is to generate $1.2 trillion in revenue. There were significant Medicare savings built in of about $800 billion, and the subsidies themselves, as well as the Medicaid expansion, cost about $1.6 trillion. So we'll see how this comes out, but there's some pretty significant fiscal components that need to be dealt with as they consider what to do. Secondly, corporate tax reform, just to put that in some context. Over the next 10 years, the total federal revenue base is about $43 trillion. Corporate tax, income taxes is only about 10%, so we're only dealing with about $4 trillion over the next 10 years. There's a lot of discussion about potential reforms. It's somewhat preliminary, as you know, but lowering rates has been a significant goal of the Republicans. That would cost about $2 trillion over 10 years, according to some of the proposals. The border adjustment tax would raise about $1 trillion, so offsetting that. And the House Republican plan called for revenue neutrality. So in order to achieve revenue neutrality, we're going to need about $1 trillion more through growth or other parts of the tax budget. And then lastly, discretionary spending, again, a big part of the discussion, defense, infrastructure, et cetera. Keep in mind, as I said earlier, discretionary is only about 30% of the budget, so we're only dealing with a relatively small piece compared to the rest. And it's also not a fundamental driver of our long-term debt. As I mentioned, the growth of entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, as a result of the demographics is where the growth is. Discretionary spending, here's the long-term path for that. So it's not a fundamental driver of the debt. Obviously, we can make changes to it as we see fit and as we agree in Congress, but it's not what's causing our debt problem, and it's actually much lower than it has been, and we're already at a historically low level. So that's not where you need to go to solve this problem. So in sum, just a few key takeaways. We already have a very high historically level of debt that is growing on an unsustainable level. The debt has a huge effect on our economy, affecting incomes, growth, et cetera. Many solutions exist. We've proven that with our Solutions Initiative. There's many ways to solve this problem. So as policymakers take on the challenges this year, we're hopeful that they'll consider our fiscal outlook in that context. So thank you very much. We want to thank the leader for appearing with us today, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thanks to the Peter G. Peterson Foundation for making this conversation possible. Now, before we get started, just want to remind everyone to hashtag the Playbook Interview if you want to tweet at us and get Jake's attention on the iPad for questions or thoughts as we go through this conversation. And without further ado, please welcome Nancy Pelosi to the stage. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake.
So, no shortage of things to talk about, as we said before you came out here. So we'll just jump right off. You began this week in a kind of a spat with the president, but most notably, you were one of the first people to call for Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, to resign. Yesterday, he recused himself. You're not happy with that?
No, but first let me thank the Peter G. Peterson Foundation and Michael for being part of hosting us here this morning. Enjoyed your presentation. It's really important for us to address the deficit, and the foundation has been in the lead on all of this, challenging all of us to make our contribution to reducing the deficit. The only thing I would say about Michael's presentation was that when President Obama stood on the steps of the Capitol, the deficit was $1.4 trillion. It is now been reduced by 70% of that as he leaves office. So when it said 2009, the spending and the deficit, it was 1.4 when he came in. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be. That's why Democrats from the start, as early as the 1982 convention, that's a midterm convention, George Miller, a progressive Democrat in the Congress, went to that convention. I wasn't in Congress at that time, and he talked about pay as you go. And that was a resolution that was passed by the convention, pay as you go. Whatever you want to do, it must be paid for. Because progressives knew from the start that the interest on the debt was money just totally, it wasn't an investment. It was money just down the drain. And even when President Reagan was president, to say we have to reduce the deficit because it is an opportunity cost for doing many other things that would create growth, that would invest in the future. And it didn't become law until President George Herbert Bush used a little bit in the agreement that came right before President Clinton became president. But when President Clinton was president, we came pay as you go. Whatever you want. It was an investment, pay as you go. If it was a tax cut, pay as you go. That meant President Clinton's budgets were, the last 4 or 5 budgets were either in surplus or in balance. And then we came into President Bush, tax cuts for the high end, give away to pharma on a drug, Medicare Part D, and also the two unpaid for wars. And the deficit soared. We went from a path of deficit reduction, debt reduction, to the opposite direction. So when President Obama took office, $1.4 trillion before he ever took office, it was at $1.4 trillion, down 70% since then. But the problem is that on the pay-as-you-go, Republicans will say, well, you have to pay. If you want to invest in education, you have to pay as you go. But if we want to give tax cuts to the rich, we don't have to pay for those. And that's really a problem. That's really a problem. So if we could just have that equity as to paying for everything that we do, it would be better. So I agree, Michael said, growth. That's a way to, and I would just say this in closing, nothing brings more to the Treasury than investment in education, early childhood, K through 12, higher education, post-grad, lifetime learning for our workers. That helps grow, that brings money into the Treasury. So when our colleagues say we've got to cut Pell Grants, we can't do this, and we can't, Head Start, under their budget now, maybe 100,000 kids will be kicked off of Head Start. That's a false economy because, again, the investment into education, again, research and development, all of those things to keep America economically #1 and help people reach their aspirations. So when we send people to the table to negotiate, we say, be agnostic. Any good idea is welcome from any side. But it has to create growth and reduce the deficit.
So could I...
and create jobs. Growth, jobs, the deficit.
Don't say she didn't pay attention backstage. That's what Lisa.
So I want to follow up on that before we get to Jeff Sessions. This is, I do. Because one of President Trump's priorities, and something that this city is extraordinarily interested in, is tax reform. And what the president, although we don't really know what the president thinks because he's not given any sort of plan that he supports, but we know what the speaker thinks, and the speaker wants to do something called the border adjustability tax, which would, if for those who haven't been following this like we have, it basically means that the country will begin taxing imports instead of exports. Simplistic explanation, I know. What do you, and they want to use that to pay for tax cuts. What do you think about that?
what it is a transfer of wealth. What they want to do is give tax cuts to the high end, as usual. I mean, it is in their DNA. It is, and I grant people their position. And their position is that if you want to create jobs, you give tax cuts to the wealthy. If you want to balance the budget, you give tax cuts to the wealthy. If whatever you want to do, you give tax cuts to the wealthy, and it will trickle down. And if it does trickle down, that would be good. But if it doesn't, so be it. And that's what the Speaker Boehner said, so be it. We had buttons made, so be it. That's the free market. We have a different view that you invest in increasing the paychecks of America's working families to have consumer confidence, to inject demand into the economy, to, again, create jobs and bring revenue to the Treasury, which reduces the deficit. So we have a different point of view, and how we go to the table to debate that is the debate of the budget is the battle of the budget in Congress. And I say to my colleagues, show me your values, show me your budget. If your values are about tax cuts for the rich and everything else has to thrive or not in that world, and the deficit has to depend on that, then make your case and we'll make ours. So the border tax is a real regressive tax on working families in our country, and we have practically zero. Maybe there's somebody who supports it in our caucus, but they have not come forward yet because it's just not a place to go. And I don't even know that it has any level of success on the Republican side. But you practically described what it is. Let us have a border tax to bring in money that is going to affect the consumer. In other words, if we charge these taxes, then we're going to pass it on to the consumer, again, affecting consumer consumption in order to give a tax break to the wealthy or to lower their corporate tax. Now, we all agree that we should lower the corporate tax. And one reason to do it is not only to make our companies more competitive, but to get them to pay some taxes. To get them to pay some taxes, because the avoidance of tax, well, that's a whole other session.
That's another 30 minutes.
Then we may want to get around to
Jeff Sessions.
the recently recused Jeff Sessions. But we need to do the tax reform. We all agree. And we think that how we do it should be in a way that brings some of that money home so we can invest in infrastructure, bring it home at a lower tax rate so people will come home and pay taxes. The other part of that is several years ago, we did repatriate funds with the idea that the companies that repatriated funds would use it to invest in jobs in America. They got the lower tax rate. They didn't turn around and invest it in jobs. So when they came in again and said, we need to repatriate funds, we said, but last time you didn't invest what's in it for the taxpayer. And they said, you're right, we didn't. But this time we will. So maybe so. And I think that we have to have that more firmly committed, with the repatriation and the lower rate, that they will. But the tax issue is, so many people talk about all the things they believe in, climate, addressing the climate crisis, guns, safety, women's right to choose, immigration reform, all those kinds of things. They really care about the most when you see the election is they don't want to pay any more taxes. And so all of those things slip away. That's what happens in an election. So people have to see that it's in their interest to have all of these things, which keep America number one: the education of our children, the safety of the neighborhoods in which they grow, the discretion that their families use. I always say the three most important issues facing the Congress are our children, our children, our children: their health, their education, the economic security of their families, a safe and clean area in which they can live and thrive, a world at peace in which they can reach their fulfillment, and our country continues to be the great country that it is. So all these things come back to the budget, and what is important to you as a nation is how you invest your resources. The budget is a statement of your values. Show you your budget, show me your values. Now, who did you want to talk about?
Speaking of values, let's circle back. I mean, the news of the day, or the week, frankly, Jeff Sessions and...
And all that, thank you to the Peter Peterson, I keep forgetting the G, the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. They have done just remarkable, factual work on all this. And Michael, thank you for your leadership and your sponsorship today.
All right, so Jeff Sessions, we're going to try third time's a charm, is...
But how about the budget? No, I'm kidding.
No, seriously, though, you have called for him to resign.
Yes.
He has recused himself. That's the latest. Is that enough? What can you do if you don't think it's enough?
Well, first let me just say, we talked about a budget being a statement of values. And then when we move into the leadership of our country, we have to talk not only about the authority of the person's position, but the moral authority of an administration. And what we see is a very narrow recusal, I'm going to recuse myself on the investigation of the election. No, there's a whole Russian connection of personal, political, and financial Russian connection of Trump and his administration, President Trump, his administration, and his campaign. So if, in fact, these meetings were innocuous, why did he deny that he had them? The fact is, he's the top cop. He's the highest law enforcement officer in the country. Supposed to tell the truth. What does that say to the lawyers in the Department of Justice? What does that say to the American Bar Association, their standard of professional conduct? To Alabama, they have standards of professional conduct. He's a lawyer there. So this is just totally unacceptable. And the very idea that they're making excuses and splitting hairs and this or that, this is, we have not seen the end of this. The recusal is an admission that something was wrong. And as you see in some of the reports in the media, which you take it for what that is worth. But
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Another attack.
No, it's not an attack. What I'm just saying is, no, look, I think the president's attacks on the media are authoritarian. They're wrong. I can't even imagine what our founding fathers think of it. But my point on this was that the media has reported that I think it's the Post, but I'm not sure, have interviewed, called a number of members of the Armed Services Committee and haven't found anyone yet, in addition to Sessions, was visited and asked for a meeting by the Russian
26 members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Sessions is the only person that has met with him. Let's drill down on that. I mean, you've been in Congress a little bit, and you're in leadership. Have you ever met with the Russian ambassador?
I'm not with this Russian ambassador, no. But
is there anything wrong? I mean, is it normal to meet with ambassadors, or what? Help us understand the
How strange is
process.
it?
Let's just say everything is about timing.
Right.
And the fact is that when these meetings were occurring, not just with Attorney General Sessions, but with others in the administration, it was very clear since the summer that the Russians were hacking our election system. So it wasn't as if they were saying, oh, hi, never mind about that, let's talk about the Ukraine. Ukraine, that's a very serious matter. So here's the situation. First of all, I keep saying every week, let's take a deep breath. This is about America. It's not about Democrats or Republicans. It's about our country. It's about our national security, which we take an oath and must protect and defend, both our people, our country, our Constitution. It's about our values, our moral authority, how we are perceived in the world. And so when we find out that a country, and I said at the convention, maybe some of you were at the Christian Science Monitor breakfast the first day of the convention, the Russians are hacking our system. I don't know this from an intelligence point of view because I couldn't talk about it if I did. But I know it because it cost me a lot of money to investigate it, their hacking of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And as you know, they were more fully and for a longer time doing the Democratic National Committee. It is the Russians. It took a number of weeks before the highest level, but that was self-evident, and everybody knew it, that the Russians were hacking our system. In the fall and before the election, the highest level of confidence of our intelligence agencies said it is the Russians who are hacking our system, and that it is a disruption to our election. Everybody signed off onto it except the FBI. The FBI said it's too close to the election. This is the first week in October. It's too close to the election. It might affect the election. What? 2 weeks later, FBI Director Comey sent a statement out that they were investigating emails of Hillary Clinton like 10 days before the election. I don't know if he was going backward in time. I don't know how he could say it's too late the first week, and yet 10 days before the election, he could make that statement, which had an impact on the election too. But 2 days before that, Rudy Giuliani said it was coming. So everybody knew that there was something completely out of order that was going on. So for him to say, well, I was just meeting with him, the normal course of a senator meeting with an ambassador, the Russian ambassador, who everybody knew was hacking our system, is beyond naive. It's almost pathetic. It's almost pathetic. So for him to go before the Congress, and he split the, did you talk to them about election? No. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But the other question was, did you meet with him? No. And so he did not tell the truth. And now it has come out that he's not telling the truth. And now what you see is there are other people in the Trump administration who have met with the Russian ambassador. I mean, in some view of one of the biggest intelligence officers of the Russian government in Washington, D.C. So this is a very big deal, because at the same time, the President of the United States is saying, I'm not sure about the sanctions. He's flirting with removing the sanctions, which for a period of time, all of us have been trying to strengthen the sanctions and talking to heads of state in Europe and saying, we have to stick with the sanctions in order to change the aggressive behavior of the Russians. And he's flirting with that. The START Treaty, oh my gosh, undermining that, praising Putin at the expense of who we are as a people. The list goes on. What do the Russians have on Donald Trump that he would do that? And I don't know who knew what in all of this, but it's important for us to find out. We must have that investigation. The very idea that the top cop would go to his colleagues in the Senate and withhold the truth. This is not an unsophisticated person. This is a prosecutor himself. He knows what's there. And it's just a reflection of the weak moral authority of this administration if they support what he is doing. And so that's why we have called for it. So this recusal is an admission that something went wrong, but it's not sufficient. And there are two things, just to close on this point, there are two things. One is the recusal as a surrogate of President Trump's campaign, but then candidate Trump's campaign, and having communication with the Russian government, knowing that they were hacking our system. That's one thing. That's what the recusal is about, however narrow it is. The other part of it is the possibility of perjury, which is punishable by law for anybody else. Certainly, we should have that at least standard for the highest ranking law enforcement person in our country. And again, the Russian influence is not just about this election. It's about what they want to continue to do here, what they are doing in Germany and France, what they're doing in Europe. They're undermining democracy. And these actions by the Trump administration make them accomplices to it unless they help us get to the bottom of it. What are the Republicans in Congress afraid of? They don't want to see the president's tax returns, the first time since Gerald Ford, who was the since Gerald Ford, all presidents have put it out. They don't want to investigate in a wholesome way the disruption of our system. What are the Republicans afraid of? This goes right to the Republicans in Congress, to their doorstep. And when the public sentiment, as Lincoln said, is everything, as they hear from their constituents, perhaps maybe they'll be more inclined to seek the truth.
You talked about the moral fabric of this administration. Certainly, Donald Trump has an acute interest, we'll say that, in that way, about you and your leadership. Let me read a few quotes. Well, I've been watching Nancy's tape, and so I think she's incompetent, actually. You know, if you look at what's going on with Democrats and the party, it's getting smaller and smaller. When he's talking about petty fights on Capitol Hill the other night, saying it's time to do away with those, time to come together in bipartisanship, what do you make of that and the fact that he kind of has done so many personal insults?
And he appeared to point your way. He appeared to point at you. Did you notice that?
I have a hard time just watching what's going on. I'm going to have to look at a tape of that, but other people have told me he did that.
I saw your head was kind of down for a little bit of it.
But here's the thing. The reason he said that, well, first of all, because I said he's done nothing. Nothing. He's done nothing for jobs, nothing on infrastructure, nothing on tax reform, nothing on, he's going to renegotiate NAFTA. He hasn't notified Congress to that effect, which you have to do to trigger the clock ticking. And he said he's going to do it in the first 100 days, and he hasn't. Even after the clock starts ticking, it takes about 90 days, and so he's 42, 43 days into it. So I said he's done nothing except put Wall Street first, make America sick again, instill fear in our country, in our communities with his immoral, in some cases unconstitutional, issues relating to immigration and the ban, deportations and the ban, and done nothing to loosen the grip on Russia, on our political process, letting them get away with all that. That's all he has done. And so and then when somebody asked me about what I think is his agenda, what does he, I use the word loosely, think about these things? I said at the press club, Chuck Schumer and I did our pre-buttal, and this is what I think got under his skin. I said, he reminds me of this story about Yogi Berra. When Yogi Berra was a little boy, he had a bad report card. In those days, you had to have mother and father sign the report card, and mother being a little more lenient, father being a little more demanding. So he went to his father with the report card. It was a terrible report card. He said, Yogi, don't you know anything? And Yogi said, I don't even suspect anything. So I just don't know what he thinks or what he knows. But what I do know is that got under his skin, and that was his comeback.
Could this get under your skin?
No. Not at all.
Well, have you had any interactions with Trump? What have they been like since he's moved into the White House?
Well, I spoke with him right after the election. But in terms of when he went into the White House, you know what happened. I mean, we go to the first meeting of the leadership, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans. I'll skip to the meeting part of it. The meeting started with him saying that he won the popular vote. I was like, what? Even if you thought you did, I mean, why are we're talking about a legislative agenda. We're talking about a new president of the United States. Show us your values. I won the popular vote, and
he didn't.
Well, but it doesn't matter. It matters that he thinks that he did. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, look, this is trivial. It's just a reflection of what is important to a person. The size of the crowd, the size of the vote, neither actually being factual statements. So this is what we have to deal with. So when a person who doesn't know the size of the crowd or the size of the vote makes a statement about my leadership, I don't trust his judgment. So, but here's the thing. He says, I'm on the popular. I said, well, that's not true. There's no evidence to support that. Well, we knew somebody was standing in line, which turned out not to be true as well. But then when I challenged him, he said, and that doesn't even count California, 3 to 5 million who voted illegally, and that doesn't even count California. But you know what? That was what was important to him. That's how he started the meeting. So this is a problem. What we need to do is talk about how we do go forward to grow our economy, to reduce the deficit, to have America be respected and preeminent in the world. And we're not going to have it, you know, it's amusing, but it really isn't funny to see how he prioritizes things. So again, nothing. I remind you that when President Obama stood on the steps of the Capitol, 2009, January 20th, I want swift, bold action now to create jobs, good-paying jobs, train our kids, educate our children for jobs in the future, the list goes on. 1 week and 1 day after that speech, we passed the Recovery Act. 1 week after that, the Senate did. 4 weeks after the inauguration, February 17th, President signed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, creating or saving 4 million jobs. He had already signed the Lilly Ledbetter Act, SCHIP, the State Children's Health Insurance Program, and other things. And and even President Bush, no, I didn't agree with him, when he took office, when he made his speech at the joint session, he had a tax plan that he had created and presented. But this president has nothing to present. And it's a stunning thing that you think, well, the Republicans have been baying at the moon for 7 years about the Affordable Care Act, and we still haven't seen a plan in 7 years except to repeal, cut it back. So it's show us something. But why wouldn't he have something for his? He talked about infrastructure in the speech. He didn't even offer particulars. This is where we go from here. It's just we're going to do these things, but not a initiative. So we can't. When people say, "Can you work with him?" Show us something to work with. So far, we haven't seen it.
Let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about working together. One thing that Anna and I have been talking a lot about with Republicans and Democrats on the Hill, and it's funny because I think a lot of Capitol Hill Republicans recognize that despite your disagreements with George Bush and John Boehner, there's been many occasions in the last decade where you've had to bail them out on votes on a whole host of issues where you've kind of done so begrudgingly at times, but you've done it. And I want to ask you on issues like the debt ceiling and government funding, which are both two big issues that we see coming up here in the next, let's say, 4 to 6 months. Talk about your mind and how you see the state of play and how you see the mood of Democrats about cooperating with the president on such huge issues for Congress and the country.
Well, I'm glad you brought up President Bush, because even though I disagreed with President Bush profoundly on the war in Iraq, and what could be worse than that, we worked very much together on so many issues. We passed the biggest energy bill in the history of our country, a stimulus bill relating to refundable tax credits for poor people, a very progressive legislation. PEPFAR, he wanted PEPFAR, I wanted big PEPFAR, we did that. We did a number of things together, including the dreaded TARP, which his members abandoned him on. We tried to work together on immigration. President George W. Bush was one of the best presidents on immigration in terms of the respect that he has for people and the policy advocated. He couldn't persuade his party. So this isn't about you're a Republican, we're Democrats, we're not working together. No, it wasn't like that at all. We have a responsibility to find common ground. And I did with Speaker Boehner as well. But on the subject of the debt ceiling, this shouldn't even be a question. This is in the Constitution. We take an oath to protect and defend it. That the credit of the Americans, of America is not in question. So I don't know how much is in the leadership of the committee on the Democratic side of Ways and Means and Finance are making it clear to the administration that we want a clean debt ceiling, lifting of the debt ceiling. And that doesn't mean we're going to have a debate about whether we're going to lift it or not, because even the debate lowered credit rating a few years ago when that debate took place. We can't have that. We can't have that. So from the standpoint of that, we stand ready to work with the president to lift the debt ceiling, a clean debt ceiling, not one that is bogged down in ideological who knows what, because I don't know that anybody knows what just now. So clean, just clean. And if we've always, I've forged two places in Congress. I was forged in the Appropriations Committee and Intelligence, and two places where we really largely worked in a bipartisan way. And the appropriators will be able to come to terms, I think, for the appropriations bills. It's just a question of what comes from on high. And what's coming from on high when you see the president saying we're going to do $54 billion on defense, well, we all want to have the defense we need. What is your mission? What is the purpose? What is this for? But we also measure our security in the health, education, and well-being of the American people. That's a source of our strength as well, both in terms of our military strength, our soldiers, and also in terms of our economic and the health of our people. So you can't take $54 billion out of the pot, upset the agreements that have been carefully crafted of parity between domestic and defense, but also recognizing that on the domestic side is included Homeland Security, intelligence, State Department, Veterans Affairs. Some of Intel may go into the defense side, but some on the domestic side. So you have all of that that is part of the domestic agenda, but is really a defense function. And if you say, well, we're going to hold that harmless, you have very little to invest in education, research and development, science, the judiciary, transportation, housing, all of the other responsibilities to meet the needs of the American people. So it'll, again, the battle of the budget is a fight that we have to have. But I have a lot of confidence in some of the Republicans on the Appropriations Committee because they know what our responsibilities are.
So we are running short of time, so we're going to move on to legislative priorities. Clearly not a lot of agreement with Donald Trump on a lot of the things that he's said so far. Tax reform by August, a $30 billion spending package, which we just talked about, Obamacare by early spring. Do you think he's unrealistic in terms of how fast he thinks things could actually get done?
Well, you have to start. That would be a good place. If he had started after the election, because I talk about President Obama from Inauguration Day here, but we didn't start on Inauguration Day. You start after the election. That's 2 full months or more in advance to get ready. So it would be unrealistic to think that things are going to happen so quickly if you never start. I mean, you have...
Makes sense.
But the thing is that just to go to the Affordable Care Act, because somewhere in the bowels of the Capitol, there may be a proposal for the Affordable Care Act.
The leaders discussed talking about, just to be clear, the Republicans have put their alternative health care plan in a closed lock room so their members can receive it. And by the way, to be fair, they knocked you guys for doing this, for being secretive, and now they're doing a very similar...
No. They may have not. That's not fair. It didn't happen.
Right,
we had scores of hearings.
I remember them.
Hearings, so we didn't have anything locked down any place. We had public markups. The Senate marked up for 22 days. That's one of the longest markups in history, a public markup. So that isn't to be fair. That is to be, I don't know. But in any case, to point out that, give me a chance to point out the difference, and I thank you for that, Jake. And the fact is that we had regular sessions where were required, mandated sessions, where we drilled down on every word in the bill so that people could understand, comment, amend whatever it was in it, and they knew that. But anyway, that's then. This is now. And now we have a situation where they want to repeal and replace. The only thing repeal and replace, some of you have heard me say this, repeal and replace have going for it, the only thing they have going for it is alliteration. They don't have the votes. And so how are they going to replace it?
So
Now,
you don't think they
So it
can?
will not happen.
They don't think it will happen.
well, they may come up with something, but here's the thing. We have said the purpose of doing the Affordable Care Act was to lower costs, because even if everyone loved their care and their insurer and all the rest of that, the rising cost of healthcare in our country was totally unsustainable to individuals, to families, to small business, to corporate America was footing a lot of the bill, and totally unsustainable to the public sector, state, local, state, and federal government. And Michael pointed out some of the continuation of that path. Largely, biggest contributor to that is the cost of prescription drugs, but that's another subject. So our point was to lower cost, expand coverage, more benefits, and increase access, more people. 20 million people, 400,000 people who didn't have health insurance before. But what's really important, and what I think the Republicans may care about, while not really caring that much about the 20 million, is the 155 million people who have more benefits at lower cost through their employer. The 155 million who get health care through their employer. Many of them have pre-existing medical conditions. And they said, well, we're going to keep that, and we're going to keep the cap, and we're going to keep the 26-year-old. But you can't do that unless you have an insurance plan that has money coming in to do it. And the other part of it is that this is a free market initiative. Romney Care, Heritage Foundation, individual mandate. You've got to have the pool in order to have the resources in order to be able to afford the coverage. Now, one of the things, what is endangered by their going down this path is all of the above. But also, what the Affordable Care Act did is it took $800 billion in savings from the Medicare program, just by creating savings, and applied it to the longevity of Medicare, the prolonged solvency, maybe 10 more years. It also strives to close the prescription, the donut hole. That means the cost of prescription drugs are lower for seniors. We still want to do more. And it has the free checkup in the beginning, so that seniors are healthier because they have that free checkup to begin with. So that lowers costs. The sooner you intervene, the healthier, the lower the cost. That's at risk. And the biggest problem I think they will face is what happens to expanded Medicaid. Medicaid that's where a lot of the expansion was for lower income people, and it is an initiative that people think of as for poor children, which is important, but a large amount of money is spent on seniors, people with disabilities. That would be also people who need rehab, opioids, and the rest of that. About almost 60%, over 50% of the money spent on long-term health care for seniors, either in nursing homes or in daycare, et cetera, home care, is from Medicaid. So I want to just close by saying Kasich, don't take it from me, Kasich said, thank God for Medicaid. That's where we're going to get the money to deal with the rehab. And the opioid issue has intensified or intensified the need for those resources. So they've always said Medicare should wither on the vine. The Speaker has had in his budget a removal of the guarantee of Medicare. Medicare is a guarantee. You remove the guarantee, you don't have Medicare. You say to seniors, remember when we didn't have Medicare and you had to go shop for health insurance? Your grandparents or your parents did. Well, here's a voucher, a small voucher for you to go do that again. So they have big challenges because this legislation was not just about the Affordable Care Act and health care. It was about the good health of America, prevention, early intervention, and the rest. So I think they have, as I say, bang at the moon for 7 years, still nothing, locked up in a basement, and that's not how we did it, even though they may have wanted to characterize it that way. We'll see what they have to offer. If it lowers costs, continues to lower costs, expand coverage, or let's say it in another way, if it does nothing to harm the path of lowering cost, increasing coverage, and expanding access, we have something to talk about.
Let's do a rapid fire. We're quickly running out of time. I want to ask you quickly, tax reform by August. That's what the Speaker says. That's what the White House says. Is that possible?
It's very hard. Again, we all think we should have that, but we haven't seen any initiative to go to the table. As I said, President Bush had his tax proposal in the address, the joint address. That would have been a few days ago already to be on a path. We'll see what they have to offer, but they have a kettle of fish out there with it. They probably should not have kicked the can down the road on the debt ceiling and doing again the budget bill, the appropriation bill, just until the end of April. So they have to do that because
Or risk a shutdown, right?
They can risk a shutdown of government. And their head of the Office of Managing Budget was the leader of shutting down government several years ago and voted against opening up government at the time. So we'll see what value they place on that.
You've not talked at all about the border wall. Will Democrats oppose any funding package in any shape or form that includes money for building the wall?
The border wall is unwise, immoral, ineffective, enormously costly. How are they going to pay for it? How are they going to pay for it? You know the Mexicans are not paying for it. And so it has no, if we had some additional money to spend, technology, personnel, and the rest is a better place to go. So I just don't see that as, he talks about it like he's building a wall, though. We'll see what he has to say, but I don't think you'd have too much support on the Democratic side, but the Republicans seem to be cheering away at it. As they were cheering away at the overturning of TPP, which over nearly 200 of them voted for. Yay!
Something that you guys cheered for at the State of the Union, one of the few things Democrats cheered for in unison, was
Mrs. Trump?
Mrs. Trump, right? Mrs. Trump and Ivanka and Jared. No, the infrastructure package.
Well, there was no package.
Well, the idea of spending $1 trillion in a public-private partnership on infrastructure.
No. The president, in addition to being a fear monger, is a notion monger. There isn't an idea that comes forward, something that says this is our goal, our vision, this is these are the facts about it, this is our plan to get it done. No, he just says we're going to have an infrastructure. And when he said the public-private partnership, that was menacing, because the speaker is saying that, and he's quoted as saying that there has to be a 40-to-1 ratio of private investment into the infrastructure. 40-to-1. For $40 from the private sector, $1 from that's not going to have the impact that we need to build our infrastructure. So I said to the president from day one in every conversation, which haven't been many.
How many have there been?
Well, it depends if you're talking about it on the phone or one thing or another. But I've made it clear to the administration, if this is a real infrastructure bill, let's talk. But if this is a tax bill disguised as an infrastructure bill, that's not going to happen. And what we hear when they says public-private partnership, that could be a good formula. Let's see what it is. But if it is what we suspect it could be, is wealthy individuals getting tax credits to build something which they will own and charge tolls, that's not a go. Because what you're talking about is the taxpayer funding it and paying for the maintenance, and somebody making a profit off of it under the tax plan. That's just not going to happen. But if they want to say, and we have several $1 trillion deficit in our infrastructure, it's never been partisan. We've always worked together in that way, except when President Obama proposed something and we no longer had the majority, then they fought that, and we did get an infrastructure bill, but not as big as we should, and that's why we need more, whether it's transportation, highways, all that, high-speed rail, mass transit, water systems. Probably we could spend as much money on water systems, which some are over 100 years old, bricks and wood. Have a glass of water on that one. Coming from bricks and wood water system. broadband infrastructure for the future and the rest. This is a jobs bill. We have to, perhaps it's with some repatriated funds, perhaps with an infrastructure bank, perhaps with public-private partnerships, but it can't be something that transfers wealth once again to the president's wealthy friends, then charges tolls for the consumers to pay for something that they already funded through tax credits. But he did mention it. But why doesn't he have a bill? Why doesn't he have a bill?
So we are definitely getting the wrap, but I cannot let you off the stage without asking you this. You spent a lot of time critiquing Donald Trump. The future of the Democratic Party, you've had a lot of infighting on the different wings. You have a new leader at the DNC under Tom Perez. There's been some criticism of kind of the stagnant leadership among House Democrats kind of staying the same. Do you think you have a strong 2018 ahead of you? What's the message that you're going to bring to Rust Belt Democrats?
Was that stagnation another name for me? Was that what that
No. No.
But it sounded like it. Now, here's the thing. And that really is amazing to me, because the beauty of the Democratic Party is we have diversity in our ranks. Who would want to be the head of a party that is a rubber stamp? So when the press is saying, oh, there's division, well, we have competition about leadership and approach and style and new realities in terms of technology and participation from the outside. And we've always been a party that has been from the bottom up. And what is exciting now, Tom Perez and Keith working together is a good thing, because they bring their talent to it. But this is it's not about the Democrats, it's about America. And what we see that gives us so much hope is that people see the urgency, understand elections have consequences. Since the election, I don't know if you hear it, but we hear it all over the country. What can we do? Never seen anything like that after an election in the manner in which we are seeing it. The urgency, taking responsibility, that gives us opportunity. And our members are united, regardless of who runs the personal ambition, which is part of a political party. They are united. They may have some differences about one subject or another in terms of their enthusiasm for certain things, but they are united by our values that center on America's working families. That's why they're Democrats. And that's the fight we have with the Republicans. Trickle down versus the middle class bubbling up. And that is the debate, and that's why we all come together. They may have less enthusiasm than I may have on one subject or another, but our unity is about those working families, and that is our purpose. It has always been our purpose, long before any of these other issues came along. But these other issues are part of our value system, and we have the strength, the talent, et cetera, to accommodate all that. So it amuses me to see the press say, oh, they have a division. It's like, no, it isn't a division. We are the Democratic Party. We are, by definition, diverse. We are, by definition, always challenging how we go forward. But I feel very confident. I don't know if you want to talk politics, but maybe we'll come back another day. But we feel confident that we know how to defeat a Republican in the White House. We did so when President Bush was there, because we had a plan and we unified. Now, we'll put together our game plan, our playbook, listening to the people. People say, where's your plan? I say, if I came to you with a plan, you'd say, how come you made a plan without talking to me, right? So we're listening to all of the new possibilities. Since we won in 2006, the whole technology opportunity is so great. So putting together the playbook, and that will be put together in a very grassroots consensus building way. We're almost getting to that. And then we'll put together the game plan, and we won't show you that. You'll see that as it unfolds.
All right. Well, Leader Pelosi, thank you so much for your time. Jake, unfortunately, we are out of time.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you to all the audience on the live stream, those who joined us in live stream. Please follow us on Politico Live online and on social media for updates on future Playbook events. And again, really a special thanks to the Peter G. Peterson Foundation for their support on making this Playbook interview possible. And please join us next Thursday, the 9th, for our next Playbook interview with the installment of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks so much.